world is a battlefield. Germany has invaded Poland. Britain and France retaliate, declaring war against the Nazis. Halfway around the globe, another brutal conflict is also underway. China is under attack from Japan's Imperial Army, facing the onslaught alone since 1937, making them the first country to have entered World War II.
James's Palace, a historic meeting of the Allied governments. Mr. Eden, the Foreign Secretary, was in the chair. Attending the conference were all the nations of Europe who are still carrying on the fight against Hitler. Monsieur Maisky represented the Soviet Union. It was emphasized that our first aim was the defeat of Germany.
In August of 1941, Roosevelt and Churchill agreed to hold a top-secret meeting at sea, just off the coast of Newfoundland. Though they have been corresponding for almost 2 years, it is the first time the President and Prime Minister have met as leaders.
This was in many ways a marriage ceremony between the British Navy and the American Navy, and the British Prime Minister and the American Prime Minister.
Together, they issued what would become the foundation of the historic British-American friendship, the Atlantic Charter.
It's a document that belongs in the same line as the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Independence. It was why we were fighting.
All of the nations of the world must come to the abandonment of the use of force. Such a peace should enable all men to traverse the high seas and oceans.
To a declaration which is a joint guarantee of future agreement. The document, built on a basis of goodwill, receives the signature of Monsieur Molitor. Mr. Cordell Hull, who Mr. Churchill referred to as that gallant old eagle, appends his signature, and the document is then passed to Mr. Eden. The three nations will not permit anything to impede the process of joint action, which alone can accelerate the end of the war and start them on the road to the great day of post-war reconstruction. Mr. Eden lays emphasis on the cordial atmosphere which existed at all times. We can see that for ourselves in these pictures which the Foreign Minister himself brought back from Moscow. After flying from Africa, Mr. Eden reached Paddington to receive a warm and excited welcome.
Soviet Ambassador Andrei Gromyko and a Russian delegation, with United States Under-Secretary of State Stettinius and representatives of Great Britain. The three allied nations are meeting here at Dumbarton Oaks to study world security and formulate a tentative United Nations proposal. Sir Alexander Cadogan of England, Mr. Stettinius, and Secretary Cordell Hull arrive, followed by Ambassador Gromyko.
Bring all war criminals to justice and swift punishment, and exact reparation in kind. These were the precise terms behind every meeting that took place in those 8 crowded days in Yalta. The three great leaders and their staffs of military and political advisors faced the inevitable battery of cameras. Through 5.5 years of war, we have long awaited this moment of the Churchill-Roosevelt-Stalin meeting, the Grand Alliance. At this point in our history, we know that Germany is to go into a straitjacket of Allied-imposed discord. The blueprint of its future has been drawn, signed, and sealed. Let a quotation from the communique issued from Yalta speak for us all. It is our inflexible purpose to destroy German militarism and Nazism and ensure that Germany will never again be able to disturb the peace of the world.
On the completed charter.
And it is now my duty, my honor and my privilege in the chair to call for a vote on the approval of the Charter of the United Nations.
Nation by nation, the delegates stand up for the great new charter they hammered out together. 50 nations standing side by side, unanimous for peace. Now, final signing of the charter. China signing first as the first nation attacked in this war. Dr. Wellington Koo's signature topping the long list to come. Then for Russia, Ambassador Gromyko commits his country also to the agreements and objectives decided upon after days and nights of compromise and cooperation. 4 main agencies upon which the world now puts its hope. A powerful Security Council having final military authority. A General Assembly representing all member nations. A Social and Economic Council to tackle the causes of war. And an international...
Admiral von Friedeburg, who previously surrendered to Monty, General Jodl, German Army Chief of Staff, and his aide, Major Oxenius. It was naturally a brief ceremony, and after Jodl had signed on the dotted line, the other signatories completed the capitulation of Reims at 2:41 a.m. True, Jodl made a statement about the sufferings of the German armed forces and people, and hoped that the victor will treat them with generosity, but the surrender was unconditional, signed with a gold pen by the Allies and an ersatz pen.
On behalf of Emperor Hirohito, Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, signed for the Japanese government. Japan accepted unconditional surrender according to the provisions of the Potsdam Declaration.
Already a historic document, perhaps the Magna Carta of peace-loving humanity itself. Now Stettinius introduces the final speaker of the San Francisco. Today, the Allied world salutes these representatives of 50 nations. They have made a beginning, a brave beginning that can build a mighty structure for peace. Out of a world of agony and total war has come a charter that must mark a turning point in human history. A new way lies ahead. The world must take this way through unity and cooperation to a lasting...
Next day, Central Hall, Westminster was the place chosen for the meeting of representatives from the 51 United Nations. And naturally enough, the arrival of delegates drew many Londoners to the scene. It would be strange indeed if we did not all have a sense of vital interest, for it may well be true that the world's last chance depends on the wisdom of UNA. Sitting beneath the emblem of the world, an unbiased North Pole view of it, by the way, Senor Zuleta, President of the Preparatory Committee, was in the chair. In the body of the hall sat groups of men and women. Mrs. Roosevelt is one of the United States delegates. Men and women chosen to represent the vast majority of mankind in this new effort to make life safe for the ordinary citizen throughout the globe. In a disillusioned world, some may think such a task impossible, but given goodwill, it is of course not impossible.
The calling together of the Security Council will not by itself establish peace.
Something of a sensation was caught over the election of a president. Most people thought that Mr. Spack would be chosen. But Mr. Gromyko had another proposal.
The Soviet delegation has come to the conclusion that the most appropriate candidature would be that of the Foreign Minister of Norway, Mr. Lee.
With 2 candidates to choose from, it was decided to hold a secret ballot, here seen being carried out. And the result? Well, this is how it was announced.
Ladies and gentlemen, the result of the ballot is as follows. Number of votes cast, 51. 23 votes were cast for Mr. Lee, and 28 votes were cast for Mr. Spack.
Was
Organizacija Ujedinjenih naroda za obrazovanje, znanost i kulturu, poznatija kao UNESCO, osnovana je konvencijom iz 1945. koja je stupila na snagu 4. studenog 1946. kada je 20 zemalja članica.
On Palestine. The map shows what partition means. The Jewish state colored light, the Arab state dark, Jaffa to go to the Arabs, Jerusalem internationalized. There was heated debate in the assembly. This is the delegate from Saudi Arabia arguing against partition. Then Senor Arana of Brazil, presiding, calls on the nations to vote and announces how they vote.
Saudi Arabia? No. Soviet Union? Yes. United Kingdom? Abstain. The United States? Yes.
The resolution of the DAC Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
The United Nations Truth Supervision Organization, or UNSO, supports the peaceful resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict. It is the first United Nations peacekeeping mission.
The one amendment which I've mentioned is as follows. In favour of adoption, 48. Against adoption, none. Abstentions, 8. So that we reach the stage, gentlemen, in which by an enormous vote and without any direct opposition, this Assembly has adopted this very important declaration.
At a special session, the General Assembly of the United Nations established a special committee on Palestine. Count Bernadotte was assassinated by terrorists in Jerusalem. The world mourned the first United Nations casualty in the struggle for world peace.
There are no words available to me to express the sorrow I experience.
Through Dr. Bunch's negotiations as mediator, final treaties were signed and peace came.
On June the 25th, 1950, a Sunday, civil war broke out on the Korean Peninsula.
On June 25th, 1950, the Korean War broke out between the Republic of Korea and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Within 2 days, the U.S. government ordered troops to invade the DPRK and sent its 7th Fleet into China's Taiwan Strait. On July 7th, the United States manipulated the United Nations Security Council to adopt a resolution on dispatching a UN force that it led to the Korean Peninsula. The United States mobilized a third of its army, half of its navy, and a fifth of its air force to join the war. Its peak troop strength topped 300,000. On September 15th, the U.S. forces conducted the Incheon landing, forcing the DPRK forces to retreat. Meanwhile, U.S. military planes intruded into China's airspace, bombing airports and infrastructure along its border with the DPRK. Do not step across the 38th parallel, China repeatedly cautioned. But the United States ignored the warning. Its army poured across the line on October 7th and pressed on towards the Sino-Korean border. The next day, at a time when China's national security was threatened, and upon receiving then DPRK leader Kim Il-sung's urgent request for aid, the Chinese People's Volunteers, or CPV, was formed. On October 19th, the CPV crossed the Yalu River to fight together with the DPRK army. It could have been a one-sided war.
one powerfully proclaiming that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. No discrimination, right to life, liberty and security. No slavery, no torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Equal protection of the law. No arbitrary arrest, detention or exile. Fair and public hearing. No arbitrary interference with privacy. Right to freedom of movement. Right to seek and enjoy asylum.
Welcome by Mr. Trygve Lie, not to mention the cameraman. Mr. Trygve Lie was in cracking form.
Dag Hammarskjöld, I wish you from the bottom of my heart welcome to New York and to the United Nations headquarters. You are going to take over the most impossible job on earth. But I wish you all luck and all the best.
Thank you very much for those kind words. Then the new Secretary General was asked how to pronounce his name correctly.
Well, I pronounced myself in Swedish Hammarskjöld. But if you say Hammarskjöld, that's all right with me.
上午10时，朝中代表团首席代表南日和联合国军代表团首席代表哈里逊进入签字大厅，并分别在9本停战协定上签字。随后，朝鲜人民军最高司令官金日成在平壤签字。中国人民志愿军司令员彭德怀在开城签字。联合国军总司令克拉克在文山签字。克拉克后来在回忆录中感慨道：“我获得了一项不值得羡慕的荣誉，那就是我成了历史上签订没有胜利的停战条约的第一位美国陆军司令官。”
And with a special emphasis on the memory of former Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld. It's been 50 years since Hammarskjöld, the UN's second Secretary General, was killed in a plane crash in what is now Zambia. He had been en route to the Congo to negotiate a ceasefire after fighting broke out. Called the greatest statesman of the century by former US President John F. Kennedy, during his tenure as Secretary General, Hammarskjöld traveled the world, negotiating the release of prisoners of war in China and helping bridge divides between Israel and the Arab states. After his death in 1961, he became the only person ever to be posthumously awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. This year's annual GA will aim to honour and preserve Hammarskjöld's dedication to global peace and development, as leaders and representatives from 193 states gather together once again, nearly half a century after his death.
I, Uthman, solemnly swear to exercise in all loyalty, discretion, and conscience the functions entrusted to me as Acting Secretary General of the United Nations.
25th, 1971, China finally got the breakthrough it wanted. The UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 2758 with an overwhelming majority.
Voting is as follows: in favor 76, opposed 35, abstention 17. The draft resolution adopted. China will be notified accordingly.
It restored all rights to the People's Republic of China and recognized the representatives of its government as the only legitimate representatives of China to the United Nations. China had waited.
To date, the two superpowers are still stationing a ground, naval, and air forces well over 1 million, and have established thousands of military with their policies of blackmail, expansion, aggression, and war. The threat to world peace and the security of the people of all countries originates precisely from these two superpowers. I hereby reiterate that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China's territory, and the U.S. armed invasion and occupation of China's Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait cannot in the least alter the sovereignty of the People's Republic of China over Taiwan. That all the armed forces of the United States definitely should be withdrawn from Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait, and that we are firmly opposed to any design to separate Taiwan from the motherland.
Your Excellency, I have the honor to inform you officially that the General Assembly has appointed you as the Secretary General of the United Nations for a term of office beginning the 1st of January 1972 and ending on the 31st of December 1976. Solemnly swear to exercise.
Stockholm, Sweden, June 12, 1972. Mrs. Indira Gandhi, Prime Minister of India, arrived today to address the first United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. She was met by the Secretary General of the conference, Mr. Maurice Strong, who escorted Mrs. Gandhi to the rostrum.
It is clear that the environmental crisis which is confronting the world will profoundly alter the future destiny of our planet. No one amongst us, whatever our status, strength or circumstance, can remain unaffected.
For 11 days in June 1972, Stockholm was a magnet for everyone concerned with the environment. 1,200 official delegates from 113 nations were in Stockholm for the first international conference on the human environment.
邓小平步履坚定地走上联合国大会的发言台，向世界阐述中国关于划分3个世界的理论和永不称霸的誓言。
也在世界上称王称霸，那么世界人民就应当介入它，反对它，并且同中国人民一道打倒它。
联大会场很少出现掌声，邓小平的发言多次被掌声打断。他的讲话得到了与会各国代表，特别是长期遭受压迫的广大第3世界代表的高度赞扬与好评。会后，中国代表团的席前排起了长龙，几十个国家的团长争相与邓小平。
فهل لي أن أعبر عن ترحيبنا الحار لرئيس منظمة التحرير الفلسطينية، وأدعو الرئيس ياسر عرفات رئيس اللجنة التنفيذية لمنظمة التحرير الفلسطينية والقائد العام للثورة الفلسطينية لإلقاء كلمته، فليتفضل.
My dear friends, I would like to welcome you all to this really historic event.
It is simply not possible to leave out one half of mankind in this respect. In my view, democracy can therefore hardly be further developed without la femme, si elle veut accéder avec plus d'aisance à des fonctions importantes, doit être munie.
Recognition and removal of such violence is essential towards the recognition and removal of violence internationally.
Of the Sea. The convention is also sometimes referred to as the Law of the Sea Convention or the Law of the Sea Treaty. The Law of the Sea came into operation and became effective from 16th November 1982. However, the first time such a proposal was announced before the United Nations was in the year 1973. Over the course of 9 years, with representatives from over 160 countries coming forward, UNCLOS came into existence. The convention contains 320 articles and 9 annexes, which governs all aspects of ocean space.
It is significant that the end of the decade conference should take place in this beautiful country of Africa, where many of the challenges and hopes for the future of developing countries are crystallized.
In 1987, more than 30 countries agreed to phase out the production of CFCs and signed the Montreal Protocol.
that the General Assembly has appointed you Secretary General of the United Nations for a term of office beginning on 1 January 1992 and ending on 31 December 1996.
General Maurice Strong for his tireless work in bringing this Earth Summit together. This is truly an historic gathering environment.
The world is our garden, and together
we cannot be complacent unless the agreements reached here are accompanied by real.
We'll also introduce you to John Shattuck, the new point man on human rights for the Clinton.
Many expect polling stations to be overwhelmed. There's already talk of extending the voting period. So many have waited so long, 3 days is just not enough to change history. Jim Laurie, ABC News, Soweto.
I'm now very pleased to invite the distinguished delegation of South Africa to proceed from its seat to occupy its proper place in the hall. I extend a very warm welcome to the delegation of South Africa as it resumes its seat in the Assembly.
Dear Secretary General, dear Nafis Sadiq, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let us turn from the dramatizing of this conference, which has been going on in the media, and focus on the main issue. We are gathered here
successful in many operations all over the world. We have some setbacks, but the fact that we have some setbacks is not a reason to be pessimist. On the contrary, we all us to be optimism. I am sure that we will celebrate the next 50 years.
The Fourth World Conference on Women must elicit commitments to action, coupled with commitments of resources. This is the mission in Beijing. No further analysis, but a deeper level of action.
联合国第4次世界妇女大会今天下午就要在北京开幕了。
I have been inspired especially by the women from the South, by the women from the developing countries, who against overwhelming odds have fought to change their lives.
But we cannot lose hope. Here in Beijing, in the midst of all of you, we feel that the sun shall rise. And so we join all of you, and we continue to hope that we shall.
By His Excellency Mr. Jiang Zemin, President of the People's Republic of China.
Mr. President, in a few years' time, mankind will bid farewell to the 20th century, a century full of vicissitudes, and enter the 21st century, a century full of promise. At this historical juncture, it is of great significance that we are gathered here from all corners of the world to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the United Nations. The founding of the United Nations 50 years ago was a major event in the history of international relations. It reflected the strong desire of the world's people to eliminate the scope.
A/50/L78 is adopted.
I, Kofi Annan,
I, Kofi Annan,
solemnly swear
to
exercise in all loyalty, discretion and conscience, the functions entrusted to me as Secretary General of the United Nations, to discharge these functions and regulate my conduct with the interest of the United Nations only in view, and not to seek or accept instructions in regard to the performance of my duties from any government or other authority external to the organization. Congratulations, sir.
3-day special session at the United Nations today to discuss strategies to fight the global AIDS epidemic. This meeting marks the first time in history that the General Assembly has convened to discuss issues related to a single health problem. In his opening speech, Secretary General Kofi Annan urged all nations to devote more resources to fighting the disease.
Spending on the battle against AIDS in the developing world needs to rise to roughly 5 times its present level.
He also told government officials to fight against prejudice towards people living with HIV and to treat AIDS patients with compassion.
Peace must be sought above all, because it is the condition for every member of the human family to live a life of dignity and security.
The 10th anniversary of the first Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, which initiated a vision of sustainable world development. The UN, in order to continue its advocacy of continued promotion and implementation of a 21st century agenda, chose to convene the Earth Summit 2002 Sustainable Development in South Africa, where heads of state and other elites joined forces. More than 60 presidents, vice presidents, and monarchs, more than 40 prime ministers and deputy prime ministers led delegations from many countries in participating. More than 60,000 representatives of officialdom and civil society, as well as journalists, assembled in Johannesburg. It was the largest international conference ever held by the UN.
Excellencies, colleagues and friends. 60 years ago this morning, the world awoke to newspaper headlines announcing the signing of the UN Charter, a document that has guided all who work for this organization, from the most exalted to those who toiled away in anonymity. It is now my great honor to invite the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Jean Ping, to say a few words. Monsieur le Président, vous avez la parole.
Monsieur le Secrétaire Général.
Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today we are celebrating an historic event, deeply meaningful for our organization.
Secretary General Kofi Annan. He met with reporters today in New York and previewed the General Assembly meeting
of the United Nations, His Excellency Kofi Annan.
Co-Presidents, Majesties, distinguished heads of states and government, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. 2 years ago, speaking from this podium, I said that we stood at a fork in the road. I did not mean that the United Nations, marking its 60th anniversary this year, was in existential crisis.
中国将进一步扩大对重在穷国和最不发达国家的援助规模，并通过双边渠道，在今后2年内全面免除或以其他处理方式消除所有同中国
Nobel Committee has decided that the Nobel Peace Prize for 2005 should be shared in 2 equal parts between the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, and its Director General Mohammed El-Baradei for their efforts to prevent nuclear energy from being used for military purposes and to ensure that nuclear energy for peaceful purposes is used in the safest
government
from any government
or other authority external to the organization.
External to the organization. Thank you very much. Thank you. The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided that the Nobel Peace Prize for 2007 is to be shared in 2 equal parts between the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, and Albert Arnold Al Gore Jr. for their efforts to build up and disseminate greater knowledge about man-made climate change.
Designed to accelerate progress in meeting the needs of women and girls worldwide. Today's action will do more than simply consolidate United Nations offices. It will consolidate United Nations strengths. The UN has made significant progress in advancing gender equality over the last decades. But despite major achievements, the United Nations has faced some serious challenges, including inadequate funding and
主席先生，各位同事，中国是联合国大家庭的一员。中国的发展变化受到国际社会的高度关注。 我愿意就如何认识一个真实的中国，谈谈我的看法。中华人民共和国成立以来，特别是改革开放30多年来，中国这个古老的东方大国发生了翻天覆地的变化，国家经济实力和综合国力大为增强，人民生活显著改善，社会文明程度大幅提升，国际交流与合作不断扩大，中国已经实现了由解决温饱到总体上达到小康的历史。
United Nations headquarters Tuesday, the UN General Assembly appointed Ban Ki-moon to a second term as UN Secretary General. He'll serve for another 5 years. After taking his oath of office on the historic Charter of the United Nations, the Secretary General said he wants the future to be marked by decisive and concerted action.
As a Secretary General, I work as a harmonizer and bridge builder among member states, within the United Nations systems, and between the United Nations and the rich diversity of international.
It is exciting, and it's particularly in the case of Southern Sudan, given the deep involvement of the United Nations in the process towards statehood. You know, I believe that it is very gratifying for the Secretary General, although I can not necessarily speak on his behalf, but it is gratifying for us to see South Sudan come into full statehood.
Change as an opportunity to act now, work together and save tomorrow today.
Munkento says modern innovations alone are not enough to protect the environment.
While engineering solutions have provided us with great improvements in development and human well-being, they alone are unlikely to help us deal with climate change.
The UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, held in Sendai, Japan, is putting an exclamation point on lessons learned from recent calamities and what more can be done to prepare for the inevitable. Just days after the 4th anniversary of the triple disasters that struck Japan, government and business leaders, NGOs, and citizens from around the globe are aiming to forge a new international framework to reduce catastrophic risk. Tohoku University professor Fumihiko Imamura, an expert in disaster control research, said shoring up food and water, energy and heat supply, as well as having mobility in crises, are imperative.
電気が重要である、これを学びました。当時ですね、さまざまなデータ情報として発信していましたけども、電気がないとですね、それを受け取ることができなかったんですね。そういう意味で電気自動車というのは非常に重要です。
The private sector has its own part to play, and an industry convention in Sendai is concurrently highlighting strategies and resources to be employed when disaster strikes.
我们要摒弃一切形式的冷战思维，树立共同、综合、合作、可持续安全的新观念。我们要充分发挥联合国及其安理会在止战维和方面的核心作用，通过和平解决争端和强制性行动双轨并举，化干戈为玉帛。坚持走绿色、低碳、循环、可持续发展之路。在这方面，中国责无旁贷。
Good morning, everyone. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we're very pleased to be together today. Greatly honored to be together with the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Megan Smith, White House Chief Technology Officer, United States. We have Yusra Mardini, Olympic swimmer from Team Refugees. We have Nazim Al-Malakab, together from Malala Fund, and Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees, Ms. Kelly Clements. Other distinguished delegates have joined us as well, who will be participating in the dialogue. My name is Susan Alsner. I'm the head of the United Nations Non-Governmental Liaison Service. We emphasize the last two words in our name, liaison and service. We created this space for refugees and migrants, specifically to dialogue with governments on their views on the outcome of this summit. So you see all these paper nameplates around. These are all of the community of refugees and migrants that have gathered today to be in discussion. It's going to be an audience-driven event, but we have a first 30 minutes of special programming with a focus on youth from Syria, young children from Syria who've faced immeasurable challenges and come through with very inspiring examples of how to face challenges and shine on the other side. So after we hear introductory remarks from the Secretary General, we'll hear from these compelling individuals to help inspire us to reach the other side of these excruciating challenges that we see in the world. We're going to have, for the first time ever in the history of the United Nations, a live video uplink facilitated through all the technology of the building.
This was the moment when Antonio Guterres became the next head of the UN. What's known as a vote by acclamation, a pause showing the General Assembly back last week's secret ballots on Security Council. There had been strong arguments that the 9th Secretary General should come from Eastern Europe, the only region that's not had the job. Many said after 8 men the job should go to a woman. In the end, the 67-year-old's experience shone out. Former Portuguese Prime Minister, 10 years heading the UN's refugee agency.
My feelings can be described by just 2 words: gratitude and humility. And it is with the same gratitude and humility that I stand before you today, now joined by profound sense.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are well. Excellencies, distinguished guests, members of the press, here in the audience and joining us via live stream from every part of the world, a very warm welcome to Stockholm, Sweden. For the global launch of 2016 Human Development Report with the title Human Development for Everyone. My name is Marika Grisel. I'm a journalist and filmmaker, and for the past 25 years I've been reporting on development in Africa. But this afternoon I'm honored to be the host in launching the report that has the potential to influence the life not only of millions of people all over the world, but also lives in Sweden.
Population has grown.
States having thus been elected members of the Human Rights Council for 3 years, term of office beginning on 1st January 2018. Afghanistan, Angola, Australia, Chile, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Mexico, Nepal, Nigeria, Pakistan, Peru, Qatar, Senegal, Slovakia, Spain, and Ukraine. I congratulate those states which have been elected members of the Human Rights Council, and I thank
国际防扩散公约协议应当得到全面完整执行。
Ensuring non-proliferation also requires collective leadership.
La lutte contre Daesh a confirmé l'intérêt des groupes terroristes pour les armes de destruction massive.
Предусматривающие санкции за передачу любых видов вооружений террористам.
I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. Your voices must be the beating heart of our work.
We must marshal our conviction, our values, and overcome hatred, exploitation, and division.
I am Peng Liyuan, a WHO Goodwill Ambassador for TB and HIV/AIDS. Congratulations on this high-level meeting and greetings to you all. I became China's ambassador for TB in 2007 and the Goodwill Ambassador in 2011. It is a mission and a responsibility I cherish dearly.
2 weeks of hard grind and sleepless nights for the delegates, during which it often seemed progress was elusive, have ended in success at the COP24 Climate Summit in Katowice, Poland. Nearly 200 nations have signed up to the rule book that will underpin the implementation of the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. 2 years of work were needed ahead of the summit to forge consensus and overcome the many political divisions that threatened the deal. The agreement comes into force in 2020 and seeks to limit the rise in global temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius.
Trees and various insects. In the fall, the leaves were falling, and we could eat delicious seasonal fruits. And in winter, we made snowmen which covered the whole world white. I was sad to see the leaves that far in winter, but I made the promise for next year. This was natural 15 years ago, but today, spring and fall are disappearing because of the climate crisis.
distinguished delegates, welcome to the General Assembly Hall for the high-level meeting to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Before proceeding, I would like to invite you to view a video, 75 Years of the United Nations, a retrospective of the work of the United Nations since its inception, highlighting key moments throughout its 75-year history and the work of the United Nations around the globe.
The floor to the distinguished representative of China to introduce this
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now have the honor to present the statement by His Excellency President Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China. Mr. President, the year 2021 is a truly remarkable one for the Chinese people. This year marks the centenary of the Communist Party of China. It is also the 50th anniversary of the restoration of the lawful seat of the People's Republic of China in the United Nations, a historic event which will be solemnly commemorated by China.